opposing epistemological views, two counterpoints, you could say, to realism. The first one being idealism. Idealism is the epistemological position that knowledge is shaped by our mental constructs or subjective experiences. So it's fundamentally centered at the individual and the individual's experiences. Knowledge is thereby based on these mental structures rather than based on a direct access to external reality. And fundamentally, this creates a barrier between any external reality that may or may not really exist and our capacity to recognize that reality. So other than the realists, we would say there is no value-free or no unbiased way of capturing that reality. Or at least we cannot know which one is the biased or which is the unbiased one. This also has implications for when you subscribe to idealism. Social science thereby would be fundamentally different from the natural sciences because there's the human mind and its sense-making that intervene between any external reality, any objective reality, and whatever we can know. That means that knowledge in the social sciences is always shaped by the social contexts in which the individual is situated, or also the individual's contextual situation. It is bound in space and time and can be highly unique for each individual. As a consequence, subjective views become an important part of social reality itself. So our notions about reality are not just interesting because they indicate biases compared to actual reality, but they are a part of reality that shapes whatever happens. That means they are worthy of study as a construct of themselves and can be legitimately used to capture reality. So there's nothing wrong about asking 5 different people about how they view a thing. That can help us capture what the real thing is. And we don't expect that there's agreement. There's perfect agreement, but probably we can crystallize like a common core understanding of how certain things are or are perceived. Changes in perceptions can both express and bring about changes in underlying reality because they are a cybernetic system, I don't know, but at least the cybernetic system is a system that includes a feedback process, right? So a cybernetic system would be a system that allows for feedback, such as a thermostat. If a person views their knowledge about politics as too low, for example, they will engage in collecting more knowledge until they are satisfied with their knowledge about politics. It's not the objective level of knowledge that motivates the knowledge gathering, and we don't know if the objective level of knowledge even increases, but the subjective perception guides the process. And that would be an interesting phenomenon from an idealist standpoint, but not so much in a realist point of view. The focus of critical reflection would be the human biases in perceiving the world, but not only for the individuals. Not only the individuals are biased, but the researchers have the same fundamental problem that they have no immediate access to the external reality and thereby are more likely to question epistemology itself and discuss epistemology quite skeptically. An example, again with natural disasters and earthquakes, where an idealist would take a different route, would be idealist would look at the different depiction and emphasis in different earthquake cases and how they affect audiences' interest in the issues. So we have the journalists or the news media outlets that differ in their depiction and emphasis, and that has an impact on how the audience thinks about these earthquakes, and we are not particularly interested if that corresponds to the real world relevance or severity of the earthquake. Just that the depiction shapes the perception of reality would be interesting in itself. And as a second part, we could look into how even the different people in the same audience would react differently to the same portrayal in the news media, because they have different worldviews that shape how they perceive or react to that portrayal. Okay, the big thing about idealism is that it is about personal, individual perceptions. That's the difference to constructivism, that is more interested in collective or group level construction of knowledge, social construction of knowledge. So constructivism would be the epistemological position that knowledge is the result of perceptions and social interactions, and that reality is intersubjectively constructed. So it's not just subjective, but it's intersubjective between different subjective individuals that agree or disagree, that negotiate, that exchange in their so to say world building, in their attempt to arrive at a common understanding of reality that they can react to, because we act in a world and we want to have the idea that it is a properly it's a real world that we act in and that reacts to what we do in an expectable way. Constructivism also acknowledges that there might be an external reality out there, but it's not possible, as in idealism, to access it if it exists independent of the perceptions and interactions that make sense of it. So it's both the perceptions and the interactions, with a focus on the interactions, that create this barrier between the objective fact and the subjective impressions. Some implications would be the same as in idealism, that social science is fundamentally different from the natural sciences, and that knowledge is shaped by social contexts. But here lies already one of the differences. It's gathered and formulated in a social context. It's not so much about individual, unique, individual perceptions and biases, you could say, from a realist perspective. It's about social, cultural, and historical context. And that needs to be considered when appraising also social scientific knowledge. So looking at what we can know, we have to consider the context in which a certain finding was made, in which a certain theory was formulated. Otherwise, we don't see the full picture and ignore the social construction also of scientific models of reality. Just like in idealism, social construction of reality thereby becomes an important part of social reality itself, and these collective processes of sense-making are worthy of study. They are a construct in themselves, and they can be legitimately used to capture reality. So cultural expressions, for example, can books from the 19th century can be used to some extent and with a grain of salt to get an impression of the reality in which they were written, the time in which they were written. Changes in social construction can both express and bring about changes in reality, very much like in idealism, but at the social level, not so much at the individual level. Again, they are a cybernetic system. The focus of critical reflection would be social biases in perceiving the world. both among researchers and humans in general. So not, again, the individual biases would be the problem, not the individual worldviews, for instance, of specific scientists would be the problem, but science as a social system that works according to a specific logic that may induce biases into scientific inquiry. Going back again to the example of a news coverage about natural disasters, constructivists there would be particularly interested in how the social significance ascribed to the earthquake has an impact on social activity. Let's look, for instance, on the amount of donations that are collected to support emergency help. So if society agrees that this is worthy of attention, that this is worthy of time and energy of the citizenry, it may also have an impact on spending on this support for emergency help. Okay, so again, the social negotiation of meaning and its effects would be at the center. You should take note, however, that in some conceptualizations, constructivism and idealism are used mostly synonymously, particularly if they are pitted against the realist standpoint as the opposite viewpoint. To sum up some of the criticisms of these standpoints, realists and objectivists would criticize constructivists and idealists because they would trivialize knowledge, because they say it's not objective. They deprive knowledge of a solid foundation in observation. So the importance of observation and evidence would not be as high because it's so contestable from the constructivist and idealist point of view. And it would downplay the role of an objective reality and objective conditions, giving rise to epistemological relativism. Think of such concepts as alternative facts, alternative realities, and subjective reality that are used to challenge, for instance, what we as a society think to know about vaccines, what we think to know about our governments, and so on, giving rise to various conspiracy theories. So that is sometimes this epistemological relativism is sometimes associated with these seeds laid in the foundation of constructivism and idealism. And there's, of course, some merit to that. So if the objective reality kind of governs what happens if we interact with the world, right? So we do something and then something happens and we can perceive that again, and thereby we try to optimize the outcomes of what we're doing. Isn't that a way of assessing the objective reality, looking at the outcomes that we can then again interact with and perceive and interact and so on. Idealists and constructivists, on the other hand, have criticism against realism and objectivism as well, saying they oversimplify the intricacies of scientific discovery. So exactly this epistemological relativism is the strength, because in the end, realists and objectivists don't take it seriously, the challenges, particularly in the social world, associated with scientific discovery. Thereby, they would accuse realists of over-reliance and blind trust on observations and evidence, and their tendency to favor certain methods over others because they seem to create more objective evidence, but that may create blind spots and lead to ignorance of methods that would in fact be helpful. However, there is one big point that all these epistemologies agree on. They all subscribe to a critical standpoint. That means that you always have to consider as a normative prescription as a social scientist that you could be wrong. So your measurements could be wrong, your theorizing could be wrong, your predictions could be wrong. So that is always a possibility you should consider, seriously consider. But also, there's also the possibility that you might be right. There might be the opposite thing, that you have to consider that everyone could be wrong. There is a well-established theory, but you find convincing evidence that it's wrong. Then you can come forward and be bold and say, see, it's wrong. And we will see if your standpoint that it's wrong persuades other people in the community or not. But you can be bold. If you think something is wrong, then you can say that it's wrong. You could be right, but everybody else could also be right or wrong. And that's a critical standpoint. It's not that you always dismiss everything, say that's not good enough, that's not good enough, that's not good enough, but that you consider which is the best thing according to what we see up until now, and without blaming yourself if you're wrong. You can just be wrong. It's okay. And everybody else should also not be worried about being wrong. That's the nature of scientific inquiry. Everybody is always wrong, but to varying degrees and in various ways. Okay. Thank you very much.